So this Chaburah is about a couple of different inyanim, but they're all related. And one is Ribbis Meruba. Ribbis Meruba is relevant in the realm of Hova, and it's also relevant in the realm of Dayonos, as we shall see. That there's a notion that both with respect to Ribbis, if there's a payment that's made after the loan has been repaid, sometimes it's going to be a problem of a Ribbis, at least what we'd call Ribbis at the Rabbanon, the Ramah Paskins. It's a lower level of Ribbis the Rabbanon where there isn't even an obligation to return it Kedei Lotzes, Kedei Shemayim. That's what the Paskins in Siman Kufa Samach Aleph. But nonetheless, still an Issa de Rabbanon, if it's clear that the payment related to the loan, that the borrower is adding on extra relating to the loan. Why is it not Ribbis de Reiss? Not Ribbis de Reiss because it wasn't stipulated. There's no kitzitza. If it would be stipulated up front that the borrower has to pay an extra amount of premium over the loan by virtue of the fact that he received the loan, so even if the Ribbis payment is paid a little bit later, that's still Ribbis de Reiss. That's Ribbis kitzutza. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when the borrower on his own decides that he's going to give an extra payment to the lender. That's Ribbis Meruba. Now there are certain exceptions as to when we say that it's going to be permissible. It's a sufficiently low level isser that we have the various exceptions that will be applicable if it's not clear that it's relating to the loan. Because what are you going to do? You're going to prevent a borrower forever from ever being able to extend a favor, to say Shalom Aleichem, to open up a door, to give Mishloach Manos to somebody just because once upon a time they extended a loan. At a certain point in time we say that it's already sufficiently removed, or the amount that's given is sufficiently a small amount that we're not going to relate it to the loan. So those are some of the dinim of Ribbis Meruba, but there are certain situations where we say, this is such a big gift that it's obvious that it must have related to the loan. In certain other situations, certainly the borrower doesn't do himself any favors if he says, I know I'm giving this to you late, but I wanted to just give this to you because I know that I put your money out of commission for such a long time, and therefore I'm giving you this extra amount. So that's a really bad idea. That's going to be us, or according to everybody, no matter what the size of the gift and no matter how far removed it is from the time of repayment. But what's interesting is that this halacha also is combined in the Shulchan Aruch. It sort of goes neck to neck with the halacha about what sort of favors are allowed or not allowed during the term of the loan itself. During the term of the loan itself, the same way that we say with respect to Ribbis Meruba that sometimes it's so far removed from the loan that we say that for sure it doesn't relate to the loan, and therefore the late payment by the borrower is going to be permissible. Sometimes we'll say, even with respect to little favors that a borrower may do to a lender over the course of the loan, that it's sufficiently removed from the loan, that it's clear that it's not being given because of the loan, it's being given because they had a pre-existing relationship, because these were favors that were rendered in the past and so forth. We have that, certainly, the Gemara has it, Daf Ayin Hayam Beis, with respect to being Makdim Shalom, that we say that it's even Ribbis Dvarim is prohibited. Ribbis Dvarim is something that nobody pretends is going to be a problem after a loan has been paid off. After the loan has been paid off, no problem of Ribbis Dvarim anymore, of saying Shalom Aleichem or anything of that sort. That's all going to be permissible from the standpoint of Ribbis Meruba. But even to the extent that we don't allow Ribbis Dvarim during the course of the loan, it's very clear that this is only when it was not the common practice of the borrower to say Shalom Aleichem to the lender prior to the loan. If it was the practice of the borrower to say Shalom Aleichem, to do other things that would constitute Ribbis Dvarim, just words of chizuk and things that don't really have a monetary value, opening up a door for the lender beforehand, and things that people wouldn't pay for, but that we would put in the category of Ribbis Dvarim. So that's going to be permissible even during the course of the loan. So the halacha, the Shochad Aruch, discusses Ribbis Meruba in Siman Reishes Kuf Samach Sif Vav, and then discusses these other inyanim in Siman Kuf Samach Sif Zayin, that there are similarly other items that might be more drastic than Ribbis Dvarim. There might be things that have objectively a monetary value. I have a shovel that I sometimes loan out, but I could rent out my shovel, so it has a monetary value if I give my shovel to somebody. If the borrower was in the habit of giving his shovel on a regular basis to the lender before the lender extended his loan, so he's allowed to continue to loan out his shovel to the lender after the loan has been extended, prior to the time of repayment of the loan. And some of the gradations and some of the exceptions and some of the discussions that relate to Ribbis Meruba of what's going to be permissible in a Ribbis Meruba context, what's going to be forbidden in a Ribbis Meruba context, are transposed by the Mefarshim as also being applicable in this type of situation as well, which is why I feel that these two inyanim go together, and I wanted to discuss them in tandem with each other. Then finally, what I wanted to touch upon is the comparison which the poskim make between these cases of Ribbis Meruba, of certain things are going to be prohibited even after the payment of the loan, and certain things will be permitted, to the question of Shochad Me'uchar. Shochad Me'uchar is not something which is so explicitly discussed in the sources. There's one Gemara and a question about how you interpret the Gemara. But Shochad Me'uchar is also derived by certain poskim, including the Vilna Gaon, from the sugya regarding Ribbis Meruba, that the same way that we say Ribbis Meruba, it could be a problem even after a loan is repaid, so it could be a problem. You give a dayan a gift even after the dayan has adjudicated the case and has decided the case. It's a little bit more complicated because a loan ends when it's repaid. As we know from the Bezdin, sometimes it's hard to tell when a case actually ends. It could be, maybe 20 years later, it's clear that a case is over, but you'd be surprised how many cases come back because there's some sort of an addendum, there's a footnote, there's a new problem that arose afterwards. So that also creates an additional layer of complication when dealing with the Shochad Me'uchar situation. It's not always so clearly Shochad Me'uchar. I sat on a case it was a divorce case, and we decided the case. It was a Zabla. So this is well over 20 years ago, I think. It was a Zabla case because they couldn't agree upon a bezin. So I sat together with Rabbi Peretz Steinberg, was a second dayan, and Rabbi Herschel Kurzrak was the third dayan. It was a Zabla case. And Baruch Hashem, we were able to decide all of the issues that were presented to us. They only presented the financial issues to us and the get issue. So we took care of the get, Baruch Hashem, and we took care of the financial issues. But the parties between themselves, we didn't endorse it, but they decided they're going to go to court with respect to the child issues because the Bezdin process, all the vagaries of Bezdin, who knows how long it's going to schlep out, let's go to court. Then 3 years later, it's still schlepping out in court. The child issues, we had to decide all the monetary issues in 3 months. But then all the issues relating to the children were schlepping out in court, and that there was some discussion that they wanted to come back to the Bezdin, maybe for the Bezdin to decide the child-related issues, because it was just draining all of their resources and it wasn't being resolved in court. And in the midst of all of this, I get in the mail the person who selected me. It was the wife who had selected me as the dayan. I sat as a borer for her side, so to speak. I do this. I normally wouldn't sit on a zabla, but for an aguna case, to see to it the woman receive a get, so I agreed to sit on the case. And suddenly I get this beautiful package like a day before Purim in the mail. I open it up. It's this beautiful Mishloach Manos. Who sent the Mishloach Manos? So this person, I said, what's going on over here? My house. She said, this is just to show my appreciation for everything that you've done for me. Not necessarily your decision, just you always be there, you've always been there for me, and so forth. I said, number one, that's a problem according to halacha, but number two, it looks like the case might still be continuing afterwards. So I picked up the Mishloach Manos, repackaged it, and sent it back to her in the mail. But even though I sent back the Mishloach Manos, nonetheless, we know from all the cases of in the ksuvas, towards the end of ksuvas, and little favors, you just have a bird go, the shua bird off of the dayan's head, or something like that, to help the dayan across the rickety bridge. So even if the dayan or you had the sharecropper who wanted to bring his payos, better case, to the dayan, and the dayan said, why are you bringing it early? Oh, because I have a case in front of you. So he said, well, then I'm not going to be able to sit on the case, even though he turned down the payos. So now I turned down the mishloach manos, but nonetheless I still might have a feeling of closeness towards this individual. So I called up the other dayanim immediately on the case, and I said, listen, this is what happened. The person gave me these mishloach manos. I sent back the mishloach manos, but I don't think I can sit in this case anymore. So I said, if it comes that this is going to reach the next stage, so I'm disqualifying myself from sitting on the case. But Lemaisa, it never happened. It never came back anyway. So it was okay. But that becomes much more complicated. So we'll talk about that as well. Im Yetzer Hashem. So what are the different gradations? So first of all, we'll start. I have the source sheet, so we'll go through the source sheet, try to do this Keseder. We have the Shulchan Aruch brings down what really was a machlokus between the Rambam and the Rosh, with respect to Ribbis Moocheres. That the way it's codified in the Shochad, in the Gemara, and Daf Ayin Hema base, it's a Mishnah. Mishnah quotes Rav Gamliel. Rav Gamliel says there's such a thing, Ribbis Mukdemis, right? That some money is paid before the loan is even given. The borrower sends it as an inducement, right, for the lender to loan him some money, but it's not conditional. So that's why it's called Ribbis Mukdemis. If it would be conditional, that would be Ribbis Ketzutza. Even if it's not conditional, that's considered to be Ribbis Mukdemis. Such a thing as Ribbis Mukdemis. There's also such a thing as Ribbis Moocheres. What's a Ribbis Moocheres? It says, love a man of a hexaloros ma'osav. Borrower will borrow the money, return the money to the lender, but now he sends him a little bit extra. And he says, because I put your money out of commission, this is why I'm giving you extra. This is Ribbis Moocheres. Says the Rosh, no, the case is very clear. The Ribbis Moocheres, I'm only worried if the borrower opens up his mouth. The borrower, you should teach the borrower, just don't talk so much, right? So if the borrower opens up his mouth and he says, this is why I'm giving it to you, it's a problem. If he doesn't open up his mouth, it's not going to be a problem. That's the simple understanding of the case. That's what the Rosh says. When the Rambam codifies this case, the Rambam says, no, it's always a problem. The Rambam doesn't specifically say that the borrower has to open up his mouth. It's just a stam case that the Ribbis is given very shortly after the loan. It's understood that he's giving it because of the loan, and therefore it's going to be prohibited. Never mind the fact that the Rambam has this confusing ruling, Perek Dal, Hilchos Ma'ava V'Love, where he seems to indicate that you could be mekel if a person has in mind that they're going to give a matana, even at the time of repayment. The Shochad writes, and everyone loves to quote him about this, but it's very muchwach, in the halakhic literature, like the Shulchan Aruch Harav, most problematic time. Most problematic time is not before the loan, after the loan, during the term of the loan. The most problematic time is the time of repayment. You're going to give a little bit extra at the time of repayment, so that for sure is going to be the biggest possible problem. Who's the makel on that? Well, it's based on the sugya in the Gemara. But the Rambam seems to be a makel on that. Even in a case of Hava, Shulchan Aruch says, okay, maybe it's a case of Mekel Komemka, you're throwing in a little bit of extra schora, machlokis about whether you're paying or throwing in a little bit of extra money, machlokis shach and taz, but certainly that's the halacha. We don't really accept this particular kula of the Rambam, but the Rambam seems to hold it even at the time of repayment itself. If a person makes it very clear that they're just kind of throwing in some extra money into the cheshbon that wouldn't be noticed. It's just they're including it so that the lender will only discover afterwards that there's some extra money. So that's also a problem. Some say no, it's only a problem when he counts. Originally, the Taz says he counts up the money and he says, and now I'm counting up some additional money. That's going to be a problem. But the case with the Rambam is makel about is where, as I said, it's all just sort of swallowed up into the cheshbon. Only then is it going to be a kula. And others say, no, it's not true. The Rambam's not really permitting it. The Chabas Das says it's only a halacha that it doesn't have to be returned. But of course it's aser. So whatever you do with the Rambam, you could say that the Rambam's talking about a case where it's just completely disguised in the payment, and so clearly muchwach that it's only being done for matana purposes, going to be mekel, or the Rambam is only mekel b'diavad, it's not really mekel, only mekel you don't have to return the money, or we're only talking about a mekel komemker case. Never mind the fact that the Rambam seems to explicitly be talking about a halva case. There are ways out of that, but it seems very, very clear that leaving aside the Rambam for a moment, certainly adding extra at the time of actual repayment, that's going to be the biggest possible problem. But what this halacha says is that if it's after the time of repayment, so then the Rambam says that for sure, if it's not 100% clear that it's for the sake of matana, the Rambam is machmir in this case, and the Rambam is machmir in this case even if the person doesn't specify. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins like the Rambam. Shulchan Aruch very clearly seems to paskin like the Rambam just says that if the payment is made by hayim shagalo doron b'shvil ma'oso shayu b'telos etzlo zui ribbis moocheres. This is considered to be ribbis moocheres, and it has the status of avak ribbis. As we said, a lighter, according to Rambam, so a lower form of avak ribbis that doesn't even have to be returned. But according to the Rambam, as long as it's pretty clear from the context that it was being given because of the money of the lender that was being put out of commission, so that's going to be usher. And the Ramah says only in a case of a pirish. So that's what we have so far. Now, then the next halacha in the Shulchan Aruch There's one other important thing that the Ramah says. So the Ramah says that either when the borrower pays back the money, he specifies he's paying it because of the loan. That's going to be a problem, fine. Then he adds something else, and this is where we have our bridge, so to speak, between this halacha and the things that we're going to allow during the course of the loan, where it says, O shehu matana meruba de mistama have ki'ilu pirish lo, or it's a very, very large gift. Very large gift, like there was a loan that was made from the lender to the borrower. He loaned him $1 million. The borrower repaid the $1 million, and then a day later, the lender looks out his front window, and he looks, and what do you know, lo and behold, there's a new Rolls Royce, which is waiting for him outside. So where did the Rolls Royce come from? The borrower said, he gave the Rolls Royce. No, he didn't say, I'm giving you the Rolls Royce for this particular reason, but why else would the borrower have given the Rolls Royce? It's obvious. It's not like he gave him maybe a box of chocolates. We can explain for other reasons. But if it's a Rolls Royce, it's a Matana Meruba, so then says the Ramah, ki'ilu pirish lo, meaning that it's quite clear what the intention is. So this idea that it's quite clear when you have a Matana Meruba, that gives us a little bit of a bridge with respect to where we draw the line when it comes to things that we allow to be given during the course of the loan. When we say certain things a borrower might do during the course of the loan, it's not really related to the loan, it's related to their relationship. Well, that might work if it's a small little thing, but if it's a very, very large thing, if something which is very publicly pronounced, what we call befarhesia, so some of the poskim say that this is in the same category of what we call the Matana Meruba. So take a look at the next halacha in the Hilchos Ribbis, as Kisimin Kuf Samek Siv Zayin. We have two things that a malveh has to be careful not to do to a loveh, even if they have a relationship prior to the loan. You know, if they had a relationship prior to the loan. One is that even if there was something that the loveh would have done to the malveh, for the malveh prior to the loan being made, he would have allowed the malveh to live in his courtyard. He would have allowed him to do that because he said they're good friends, and the malveh sometimes goes down to Orlando, needs a place to stay. Loveh says, I have a place in Orlando, you can stay in my place. No problem. So even if this was done before the loan, nonetheless, if the malveh says he takes advantage of the goodwill of the loveh, so that while in the past the malveh would have asked permission of the loveh, but now that he extended the loan, so the malveh feels that he's in charge. Every loveh lish malveh, right? He has some extra leverage in this case. So he takes advantage of that leverage by just going straight to the place in Orlando. He knows where to get the key, whatever, and he doesn't even ask the borrower for permission. So that is not allowed. That's not allowed because now he's taking advantage of that relationship. This idea of taking advantage of the relationship is only while there's a relationship. The Chelkas Ben Yamin points out this particular exception, that there are things that the borrower would have done to the lender, but that we're not going to allow the lender to take advantage of when it's shalom midaito. That's only during the course of the loan, because clearly the lender is taking advantage of the current lender-borrower relationship. If that's Meruba, find a Meruba situation, we don't find anywhere in any of the halachic literature any comment saying that the lender wouldn't be allowed to take advantage of the fact that the borrower always allowed him to do something in the past, and even do it without asking the borrower if it's Meruba, if it's after the loan was paid. Well, Chelkas Ben Yamin points that out. That would be okay, because that's only something which is a function of the relationship, the lender-borrower relationship, which only exists during the course of the loan. So that's one rule. Shalom midaito. This is both of these rules that appear in Siv Zayin come from a Tosos based on the Sugya and Daf Samach Daled in the Gemara. So that's rule number one. Rule number two is that if it's something which is done with the das, with the full knowledge of the borrower, and it's something that the lender would have received from the borrower even prior to the borrower making the loan, so then that would be okay. That would be okay. That's maybe in the same category as what we would call matana muetis, right? That the borrower is giving something to the lender, after the loan is over, it doesn't appear to be related to the loan. This would be okay even during the course of the loan. However, here we have another exception. As long as it's not something which is publicly pronounced, as long as it's not, it's my case, where the lender is going into the courtyard, he's going into the house, he's going to the Orlando winter and summer home of the borrower. So even if the borrower gave permission, that's a davar shel farhesya. To live in the person's courtyard is a davar shel farhesya. And even if it's like a chesed home. It's a chesed home that the borrower lets people go in without they're having to pay money for it, and the lender is the gavid lo avid l'meger. He doesn't need this for himself. Nonetheless, it's still going to be usher if it's a davar shel farhesya. And that's the example given. Can go like to live in his courtyard, lishtamish bavadav, or to utilize the evit of the borrower. The lender could justify this under normal circumstances. Well, the borrower is away and the Evid's not doing any work, and this way he's going to keep the Evid in good shape to make sure that the Evid remembers that he's supposed to be working and that he'll remain on his toes. So normally the Gemara says that might be something that would be acceptable, but no, it's not acceptable under these circumstances when it's in the context of taking advantage of the relationship with farhesya. People will see that it's very public. They'll know that a loan was extended from the lender to the borrower, and they'll think that this is a special favor. The borrower is allowing the person to use the courtyard of their house, the Evid, because of the loan. This all stems from Gemara. I don't want to go into all the details of the Gemara. You know the Gemara. The Gemara, based on the Mishnah and Daf Samach Dalet Amud Aleph, that talks about Hamavis Chavero Lo Yoda B'Chatzer Chinam Lo Yiskom Menen Pachos B'nei Ribbis, that the person extends a loan, he's not allowed to live in his courtyard for free. And the Gemara says this isn't only in a situation where a courtyard is generally rented out, but quotes Rav Nachman, even if it's a situation where the courtyard is not normally rented out, it's still going to be prohibited, Kimin Damasik Buzuz Zuzi Mexi Ribbis, because of the fact that the borrower owes money to the lender, so it looks like Ribbis. So Tosfos asks a very funny question when you think about it, because it's a kasha that wouldn't necessarily occur to all of us to ask. Tosfos, because I might think that there's a special rule in the Torah, that there's a certain hashkafa that the Torah imposes upon us, that, okay, maybe yesterday you were friends, but today the borrower needs one friend needs money from the other friend. So now going forward, until that loan is repaid, they're not considered friends anymore. They're considered to be lender and borrower, and all the rules change. And they have to be very, very circumspect with each other, kind of like what I would think should be the case in a dayan situation, right? I'm a dayan for somebody. In the case, my wife knows, she invites people, to the house, and she'll give me the guest list. These are the people I want to invite for Shabbos, and I'll say, okay, this person, hold off inviting them, because when you're in the middle of some sort of a case before the Bezdin, so that friendship has to be, tempered a little bit. So it says Tosfos, what are you talking about? This isn't a court case. This is a friendship. What do friends do? Friends loan each other money, so they shouldn't be friends anymore. This is what? Because now they're good friends. They're always doing nice things for each other. Now the lender loans some money for the borrower, so the borrower is not allowed to open up a door for the lender. The borrower is not allowed to loan his shovel to the lender that he always loaned to the lender in the past. He's not allowed to allow him to use his horse that he always allowed him to use in the past. How can such a thing be? You're going to prohibit, number one, the special favors that the borrower did to the lender. Okay, you might have an argument for that, but even that I don't understand, says Tosfos. But you're going to go so far that even things that the borrower would have done for other people, even that the lender's not going to be able to enjoy. Like the courtyard, the borrower wouldn't have charged anybody to hang out in his courtyard. Damasik to us, you're going to tell me this is us. So Tosfos gives two separate reasons. You could say the two reasons, each one has a kul and a chumrah, each one is standing independently. One explanation is the courtyard case is a worse, the Rav Nachman's case is a worse case because it's befarhesya, or that Rav Nachman's case is a worse case because it's shalom midaito. So I could have picked and choose. I could have said, okay, I'll choose this chumrah, or I'll choose the other chumrah. Befarhesya, midaito, that would be okay. And if it would be a shalom midaito case and it wasn't befarhesya, that would be okay. So we say, no, we're going to go the chumrah in both directions. That's how the Shochad paskin. Shochad paskin is in both directions. If either I have a situation which is farhesya, like living in the courtyard, or I have a shalom midaito, where the lender takes something that normally the borrower always loaned out his shovel to the lender. He always loaned out his lawnmower to the lender, no problem. And now the lender goes one day and he needs a lawnmower, and he sees that the lawnmower is just sitting in the borrower's front yard, and he figures, okay, I'll take the lawnmower. I'm not going to ask him, but normally he asks him, but it's in the middle of the loan term. So then we're not going to allow that, and that's how we pass him like both of these chumras. Okay. So we have both of these chumras. Now, bear all of that in mind. As I said, the chumrah shalom midaito is one that only applies during the course of the loan, but not in a ribbis maaוחרת situation. However, the chumrah b'fer hesya, that could be a different story. So look at the shach sivkot and vav. Shach in sivkot and vav has in sivkot and tes and sivkot and yud, it's going on siv vav in the Shochad. This is very important, because it tends to be confusing. You look at the shach, which sif is he going on? The shach is talking about the sif in the Shulchan Aruch that's going on ribbis maaוחרת. And he talks about why is it that a Matana Meruba is going to be usher in the case of a ribbis maaוחרת. So the shach now draws the comparison between the two sifrim. Look very carefully. The shach says, it could be that even if Matana Meruba was something that was regularly given by the borrower to the lender, he was always giving Rolls Royces to, I don't know, it was an interesting relationship. The borrower was always giving Rolls Royces to the lender. Nonetheless, usher, that's still going to be prohibited. Why? Mishum davi milsa de farhesya. Something which is so big and so fantastic and so glamorous, that's akin to a milsa de farhesya. So just same way that we don't allow milsa de farhesya in the midst of the course of the loan, something which rises to this level of milsa de farhesya. So in people's minds, they're going, it's a Mari Zion thing. In people's minds, they're going to associate that with a ribbis payment. The damin lidius chatzero. And so therefore, that's the reason why it's going to be prohibited. And then he mentions one other thing that becomes sort of a third variable. So we mentioned that we have a machlokus between the Rambam and the Rosh in a case of ribbis maaוחרת. The Rambam says that as long as it is clear that it relates to the loan, this extra payment is going to be usher, and the Rosh says it's only when it is specified, right? Okay, so let's say that it's not clear that it relates to the loan. It's not clear that it relates to the loan. It might be like well after the loan term is completed. Maybe it's 10 months later, it's 2 years later. It's not clear, even though according to the Rambam it should be perfectly fine. But the person has in mind, the love has in mind, I'm giving this out of appreciation for the loan. I'm not going to open up my mouth. I'm not going to say anything, but I know this is my kavanah. My kavanah is that I'm giving this extra amount out of appreciation for the fact that I put this fellow's money out of commission for a period of time. That's why I'm giving the money. Says the shach, that's also going to be usher. And the shach says that within both opinions. The shach is saying that even within the opinion of the Ramah. The Ramah is passing like the Rosh, who says that it's only a problem kishepirish. He says this is just as bad as shekipirish. Kishepirish means that even the lender is not allowed to accept it, because the lender knows that the borrower has in mind that he's doing it for the loan. But from the borrower's perspective, it's going to be usher for the borrower whether he opens up his mouth or whether he only has it reside inside of his heart. That's still going to be a problem. That's what the shach says. A very, very interesting thing. Rabbi Kiva Eiger disagrees. Because the Shach quotes the Baal HaTrumos. He says, this is what the Baal HaTrumos says. Rabbi Kiva Eiger says, that's nice, this is what the Baal HaTrumos says. The Baal HaTrumos is only saying this within the Rambam, because there's a machlokus within the Rambam that it could be that according to one interpretation of the Rambam holds that it's only usher when the lova has actual kavanah, and according to the other day in the Rambam, it could be usher even if there wasn't kavanah. And the Baal HaTrumos is talking about that type of situation. He says that if the person was ragil, that they normally gave gifts beforehand, we would otherwise be meko. So then, if he has kavanah, it's a problem. If he wasn't ragil, if he doesn't have kavanah, it's a problem. But all of this is only within the Rambam. So he says, but according to the Rosh, says Rabbi Kiva Eiger, and according to the Torah, that the Ramah paskins like them, so it's only asa b'mefarish when the borrower opens up his mouth and he says, I'm giving it because of the loan. So therefore, mefarish means that we don't care what's inside of his heart. We'll say, lahavdil, we'll say, whatever he has in his heart. So who knows what lurks, in the hearts of man. that is irrelevant in terms of the Issa Ribbis that's involved, and therefore that would be 100% permissible. So this is a very important nafkamina, because if you had like a Matana Muetis, for example, that was given a couple of years after the loan was over, so according to the Shach, if you say Matana Muetis, that it would still be usher if the person has kavana, even though he doesn't open up his mouth, he still has kavana that he has in mind that he's going to give it for the purpose of that the borrower is giving this amount, this gift, because of the loan. According to Rabbi Kiveger, it would seem that that would not be a problem. Okay. Yes. What? It's not entirely clear. It's not entirely clear that it would not be samach. That he would be mekel in a case which is not samach. Who is mekel in a case which is not samach? If it's very even in a case of niskaven, so that seems to be the Beis Yosef. The Beis Yosef seems to be mekel in that case, because the Beis Yosef says that if it's something which is very far away in time, then even a Matana Meruba is going to be mutter. Like even if the borrower gives the Rolls Royce at some point in time, which is let's say 2 years later to the lender, that's going to be permissible. Mufleges habe ein lochush klal afilu Matana Meruba nami shari kol shustam. So it sounds like if it's a Matana Meruba, it would seem like that's equivalent to a case of miskabin, and the Beis Yosef would agree. Everybody says that if it's pirish, even if it's much later in time, pirish is still going to be a problem. So it would seem that Beis Yosef would draw a distinction between pirish and neno miskabin if I'm dealing with a matana which is muflog that's being given at a much later point in time. And it seems to be that way. The Beis Yosef has a proof text. What's the proof text of the Beis Yosef? The proof text of the Beis Yosef is this weird case in the Gemara in Gittin and Dafa Chofam and Veis, where it's talking about, normally the lova is supposed to write up like the contract of indebtedness and then give it over to the lender. And it has to do with an item that belonged to a woman, and the husband's writing the get on this item. Did she know to be makna the item to the husband or not? So he's bringing a proof text from the situation of an old man in some hick town somewhere. And he was the one who was always making, it's in some sort of a, country bumpkin little place, I don't know. And he's the one who was always making city loans for everybody in this, city area, whatever, this village city area. So so this old man, it says, he would write the documents himself, because they didn't know how to write documents, and they would sign the documents. So the question is that it doesn't seem like this is a case either where it was coming from them, it was coming from him, it was his documents. And no, he was an old man, so he was a man of the world, so he knew to be makna the documents to them. That's the sugya in the Gemara. So Tosas has a kasha. He says, no, we're talking about a loan document. He would have a shibud on them anyway, strictly speaking, me'ikar or din. So it would only be a kasha if I'm talking about like a sale document. They would be selling fields. So, but the Gemara doesn't talk about selling fields or gifting fields or anything like that. So Tosas makes it up. So Tosas says that you have to infer from the Gemara the fact that he's making these loans to these individuals in this it's called an ear. It sounds like it's an ear with people who are not that knowledgeable. But he's writing these loan documents, so it must be that there are also sale documents that are coming from them to him. Why is that? Because he was constantly making loan documents to them. They must have loved this guy. And they must have had such incredible appreciation for this guy that it must be, he makes the whole story, that it must be that they were gifting their fields to him after a period of time. Like, everybody loved this guy. He was their big, mascot. Whenever they would have their big village parades, he'd be like the grand marshal. Everybody loved this guy. So they would give their fields to him, or they would sell their fields maybe at a discount to him. And presumably it would be done the same way, that he would write everything and they would and they would sign it. So that's the kasha, because here the document really has to come from them. So how could it come from them if he's the one who's writing the document? So that must be what the Gemara is talking about. But Tosas doesn't seem to have a problem with this concept, that because of the fact that he was making these loans for them, this Zokin Echad, that they were gifting their fields to this fellow. But why is that? So says the Beis Yosef clearly, because even though a field is very much a Matana Meruba, you give a whole field to somebody, it's a Matana Meruba. Even though it's a Matana Meruba, nonetheless, it was something which was muflag. It was much later in time. So it sounds in the Beis Yosef that even miskabin in that particular situation would be okay. So comes along the Shulchan Aruch Harav. Shulchan Aruch Harav says that there are really two different approaches over here. he says that one is the approach he quotes from the Shach. He doesn't say the Shach's name. He says, says that if a person regularly gave gifts in the past, so then it would be okay, as long as he doesn't have in mind, this is talking about a Ribbis Meruba context, that he's going to do it because of the hava. And then he says, V'yesh matirin. There are those who are matirin, even though the person has kavanah, as long as he's not mefarish, right? So that would be the opinion that argues with the Shach. Who argues with the Shach? Taz argues with the Shach. Those who argue with the Shach. Rabbi Kiva argues with the Shach. Okay, so he says that there is an opinion that says that even if he is miskavin, as long as he's not mefarish, it is okay. Then go down a number of lines. It says, says that if I'm talking about a Matana Meruba case, so then that's always going to be awesome. Also because of this idea that it's pirsum, but also muflag harbe. But if it is going to be at a much later point in time, in a nearest Ribbis, then it doesn't appear like Ribbis. Or Matana Meruba, even if it's a Matana Meruba, like the case of the Zakin Echad, right? And he throws in what's implicit in the Beis Yosef. You see, so he does our work for us. So the Beis Yosef, so the Shulchan Aruch throws in what's implicit in the Beis Yosef. He says, even if he's miskavin, but all of this is only a long footnote to the second line of this excerpt from the Shulchan Aruch in Siv Zayin and Hilchos Ribbis, which is V'yesh matirin. The V'yesh matirin follows the first line, which is the Shach, right? So then he says, so therefore he says, that would be mutter as even a Matana Meruba if it's a very, very far in time. Lefi svarazu, according to this opinion. But according to the first opinion, which is what? Which is the opinion of the Shach. You should be machmir like the first opinion, namely that of a Shach. So the way he's understanding the first opinion is that the first opinion you would be machmir even with, if I'm dealing with a zman muflag, even if I'm talking about muflegis harbe, I'm talking about a much later point in time. For a matana meruba, I would still have to be machmir in a case of niskavin according to the Shach. Now, how in the world, should we paskin? There are the various, people who have written on this issue. So I found, some articles written by various Talmidei Chachamim about how to, what we should do the Maaseh. So Moshe Tzvi Zilberberg, in an article in Or Yisrael, said that, we're talking here, Ribbis Meruba, it's mufleges, and it's very far away in time. So he thinks that there is room to be makel, like the shitos that say that if you're not miskavin, that even if you are miskavin, if you're not mefarish, so then he thinks that you can be. He thinks that you could be makel, especially in a case of muflog. So I don't know that everybody would necessarily hold that way, but it's not entirely clear. I just wanted to point out, according to Shulchan Aruch, any time in which you have a case situation of niskavin, it's always going to be problematic. Then he goes on to say that even according to the Svar Achrona, you should only be mekel in a situation of a matana mu'etis if it's samuch, right? And where it's known, the person who's giving it knows that he would have given this amount even if not for the hava, even if not for the even though this is the first, if you sold a held like the second svar, so then even if it's niskavin, then it wouldn't necessarily be a problem, but it's not something which is broadcast to the whole world, that it's related to the loan. However, if it's something which is going to be broadcast to the whole world, everybody knows. In other words, that it will be patently obvious to everybody that it wouldn't be done without the hava. So then he says that's considered to be a matana meruba. Why am I quoting from this next paragraph? Because this paragraph adds another dimension to matana meruba. Then when we say matana meruba is the one is sort of carved out in the Ribbis Meruba's case, even if you hold that it's not a problem as long as you're not mefarish, and even if you hold that it's not a problem even if you're miskavin, nonetheless he says that was matana meruba, that samuch is considered to be a problem, and anything which is a situation where the world looking at this gift would say there's no way in the world that this gift would be given if not for the fact of the hava will qualify as a matana meruba. Matana Meruba is not a magical thing that has to be a Rolls Royce. It could be anything where the people looking on would say that this is obvious that it's only being given because of the halva. So even if whether I compare Matana Meruba to Farhesya, or I compare it to this situation, it seems like it doesn't have to be per se Farhesya to be a problem. Since remember that we're not talking necessarily in the Ribbis Meruba's case about people who were friendly with each other who did these types of favors for each other beforehand, because Ribbis Meruba is mutter even if they didn't do these favors before, and so therefore there's going to be a little bit of a stricter standard in terms of this Matana Meruba. It's not going to be dafka for Hesya thing. It's going to be anything where it's sort of clear that from the context that anybody would be able to figure out that it was based upon the loan. And then he has his famous paragraph about B'shas Piron, everything is off limits. B'shas Piron, in the time of repayment, l'divrei kol asar lozel yitain lozel l'kabel, afilu davar muat, yotem michovo, bein mos, bein davar akim. I don't care if it's merchandise or money. I don't care if it's stam. I don't care even if it's no kavana. I don't care if the person is rogil, litain lo matanos kodem l'chein. Everything is going to be 100% prohibited. We know who disagrees with this particular statement of the Shochad Aruch. That's none other than the Machne Ephraim. But the Machne Ephraim himself is sort of a question mark as to how far you apply or disagree or agree with the Machne Ephraim. We'll get to that in a second. Now the Chokmas Adam, I just wanted to read to you, says, V'lo mibayim, B'shas Piron Asr the Mexel Ahed Ribbis, Elafilu Meocheres Ribbis Meocheres Asr, and then he gives you all of the scenarios of Ribbis Meocheres, and then go to the next page. V'chein afilu Matana Muetis V'stam El Sheyoded Lapach Lo Nosin Lo Asr. So here, he also seems to paskin like the shach. I mean, he says explicitly he paskins like the shach as well. The niskavin is going to be aser, but he draws the following distinction, which we hinted at before, something that the Shochad Aruch didn't do. He said, what's the significance of niskavin? The significance of niskavin is that from the perspective of the malveh, if the loveh doesn't say anything and it's not clearly related to the loan, so the malveh can assume that the loveh is not doing anything hanky-panky, he's not doing anything wrong. So then it would only be an issa for the loveh, but not for the malveh if he's niskavin, but he doesn't say anything. And we're talking about like a matana muetis after the loan that's not clearly related to the loan. He doesn't have to assume that the loveh is a rashi. He doesn't have to ask the question, why are you giving me this box of chocolates? This would be sort of the classical matana muetis, right? I made a loan to somebody. The person returned the loan. Now a week later, a bouquet of flowers arrives at my house before Shabbos. A box of chocolates. That's not a matana meruba. Not a matana meruba. I mean, it depends how expensive the flowers are. It's like a $6 bouquet of flowers. It's necessarily not a matana meruba. So I don't have to ask him the question. I could just say, okay, this is perfectly fine, right? However, if the lovin knows, then it'll be aser. And he says as well, even if it's muflog. So this idea that the base Yosef seem to have introduced that if it's muflog, so then everything is fine. Even if there's kavana, he says, no. If there's kavana, the base Yosef didn't say kavana, but it's implicit from the base Yosef. There's kavana, so just the same way the Shochad Aruch says it's a problem, Chokmas Adam also says it's a problem. So we have a number of authorities say kavana is very important over here. The Lovin knows that this is why he's giving the extra amount, so it might not be a problem for the Malbit to take it. He doesn't have to assume the worst, but it's a problem for the Lovin to give it. But the Malbit doesn't have to assume the worst. He'd be allowed to take it, even if you're Matana Meruba. As long as the bar keeps his mouth shut. Be sure that so then it would be permissible. So this is the way that you can potentially reconcile these different opinions. Now, how do you define this category of muflegis, that you say, if it's muflegis, so then even if it's a matana meruba, so the malva can assume the best. So what if the lender and the borrower, they didn't have any shaykhos with each other other than the loan, and then suddenly this Rolls Royce shows up from the borrower a year later? So what else is the lender supposed to attribute this to other than the loan, right? So Shevet Alevi says that maybe you can, this is Rav Osna, he says maybe, he said that you can define muflog in one of two different ways. Some say 1 month is muflog, some say a year is muflog, some say a couple of days is muflog. It doesn't really appear to be a very clear shear. I mean, it's hard to imagine a couple of days is muflog, but it doesn't appear to be a very clear shear with respect to muflog. I certainly have seen 1 month with respect to muflog. Shevet Levi says, have they moved on to another stage of their relationship. In other words, the loan has been paid, and now they're moving on to something else. They have a business deal with each other. They have they're planning a trip with each other. They're going to a ball game with each other. They are having a charusa with each other. They've moved on to the next stage of their relationship. So at whatever point they move on to the next stage of their relationship, says this is very mistaber, I think. He says that is when it's muflog, because then you can easily attribute the gift to something else. That's muflog. He says that is one definition of muflog, right? Muflog habe mizman gamli, or it's a really, really, really a long time away. Now that raises a question. Let's say it's a really, really a long time, but they didn't have anything else to do with each other. So then, what is the lender supposed to think? Like, how is the lender malamed schus that it's not something related to the loan when suddenly it's, okay, so he made a $1 million loan to the borrower, he got his money back. They didn't have any conversation, any dealings with each other. Now it's 20 years later, and suddenly a Rolls Royce shows up at his house from the borrower. Why is that going to be okay? So, hold that thought. I think I might have a suggestion. So the Machne Ephraim has this interesting idea. Machne Ephraim says if it's crystal clear, 100% clear, that something is being given because it is a gift, so then he says that for sure is right. That explains the difficult Rambam, where the Rambam says that if the person just inconspicuously throws in some extra coins into the purse that he's handing over to the lender when he pays back the loan, and it's more than Kadei Shadas to Toeh, and it's more than a person would normally make a mistake, so it's clear that it was B'kavana. So Rambam seems to indicate that that's okay, and as we said, that's very, very problematic, and we, as I said, halacha l'maisa, we probably don't paskin that way, so I mean, we don't paskin that way really, but nonetheless, that's, sort of one of the points of it. It's one of the points of data. So it says that the Machne Ephraim, that I believe that there is the following. He talks about the situation of the Oso Zokin. The Oso Zokin, where the Beis Yosef said that this is a Matana Meruba, and the Beis Yosef had to give a teretz. Well, Matana Meruba, if it's a long time away, so that's going to be okay. So he says, I don't think it's a kasha at all. Because we would be talking in that case when the people gifted their fields to this old man, you know what they said? They said, old man, we want to give you a gift. And those are the magical words. In the same way that according to the Rosh, a person saying, I am paying you this money because of your money that I put out of commission when you loaned it to me, that is the kiss of death. So too, a person who's pirish, a matana, that's the kiss of life. You say matana, that makes everything mutter. No problem, it's good. Matana, great. Matana, nothing to do with ribbis. This is a matana. Yeah, sure. I'm giving you a matana because I'm so happy that you gave me money that I was able to borrow. But I'm giving this to you as a matana. Machne Ephraim says that solves all problems. That's what he says. Which is why people are not so thrilled with Machne Ephraim. It can't be. It can't be if a person has kavanah that they're giving something as interest and they just throw in the magical word matana that everything is going to be mutter. But that's what the Machne Ephraim says. Below cost, because this way he's able to explain away all kinds of studios. Below cost matana. Then he says, Matana, it's like the time of the Chachamim. That's a paskin in Shochad Sif Chav Gimel, except that we say not that it's money per se, and also it can only be up to a chomesh, and nobody realizes the din of Tam Chacham nowadays is what's added by the later poskim. But why is that? Because he says, so it's quite clear that they're giving the Shem Matana, even if they don't open up their mouths, even if they don't say that it's the Shem Matana, when it's like crystal clear, it's an umdan in the Muchach. So he says that would be perfectly fine as well. Furthermore, this is the explanation of the Gemara in Baba Basra on Daf Kuf Lamed Ches. What happens in the Gemara in Baba Basra? He doesn't really spell it out so much. In the case of Baba Basra, you have a Shchim Meira is on his deathbed, and he says, I want you to give this amount to my creditor. I owe money to my creditor, but I want you to give him Karoyulo, like he really deserves. If he says Bechovo, so you just pay up the amount that he owes. But if he says Karoyulo, like he deserves, so that means that the person is saying that this was such a wonderful, fantastic fellow, I want to give him a gift. And in fact, what's the halakha in Shochad Aruch? The Shochad Aruch is Siman Reish Nun Gimel Choshen Mishpat Paskins, that if the individual on his deathbed said Karoylo, like the Gemara says, so then you pay back the loan, plus you give this fellow Karoylo. You give him like this 200 zuz, whatever the amount is, that the person said, I want you to give this extra amount. It could be double what the amount of loan was, but I want you to give this amount because clearly he wanted to give it to him as a gift. Otherwise, why should this be mutter? You're paying back the person's debt, plus you're throwing on this gift to the creditor. That should be ribbis, right? No, but the fact that he said Karailo, so it shows that he had in mind that would be a Matana. And of course, this also explains the Rambam of the person who folds in a little bit of extra money for the individual that he owes money to, that he sweetens the deal, so to speak. So why is that permissible? Because it's clear that under the circumstances that it is meant to be a Matana, right? So this is a very interesting question. So it sounds a little bit like the case in Baba Basra certainly seems to very strongly support and buttress this position. But there is another way of understanding the Gemara in Baba Basra, and this opens up a totally new portal. And this is something, I don't know if you've seen this, but you find this theme in a number of the different poskim that talk about this issue. Certainly the Bris Pinchas, that by Pinchas Wind, who's considered to be one of the foremost authorities in Hilchos Ribbis nowadays. And you find this in a number of other places as well, which is the question of what if there's a relationship that is created between the borrower and the lender that didn't pre-exist prior to the loan, but the loan creates a relationship. The loan itself creates a relationship. Yes, it creates a borrower-lender relationship, but it also creates a schmoozing relationship. You didn't schmooze with this person before because you didn't need, the borrower didn't need to ask for funds. Now that the borrower asks for funds, so they're on speaking terms. You can have the person who's like your biggest enemy, but if you had something in common with them at one point in time, it creates a bond. You ever meet somebody up, that you went to Yeshiva with, you went to elementary school, you spent 10 years with them, you were the worst enemies with each other. Now you meet up 20 years from each other. Oh, my old good friend, you remember the good times we had together. You didn't have any good times together, you hated each other. But the thing is that there was a relationship. Because of the fact that you had some interaction with each other, it creates a relationship. So too, there's a relationship that's created between this lender and borrower. It's the strangest thing. As a result of this loan, it actually creates a relationship. So the Rashba has a slightly different formulation, and you could say that it's a very dakistic formulation, but it may be a question of, is the person giving extra because of the loan, or they're giving extra because they have an appreciation for this very fine, benevolent fellow who extended the loan? And it could be that if they're giving something extra, not because of the loan, but because they just want to show appreciation to this really, really good guy that they now have become close to as a result of the loan, so it could be that's okay. And that's a better, according to the Machane Ephraim, even if the person is giving the extra money to Gama Chesed May as something that relates to the loan itself, but they're giving it B'lashon Matana, so that's okay, but that may not be true. It could be that what we can derive from the case of Baba Basra is that if the person is giving some extra money, not because of the chesed per se, but because of the appreciation for the Adam, so maybe that's a different story. Look at the Rashba on the Gemara of Baba Basra. It says, the Gemara says, if the individual, the Shkimera said, Bechovo, then you just give the amount of loan. He said, Karaylo, so then you give the loan plus you give this extra gift about. So take a look at Mio, second line. Mio Geshama Karaylo, Apavi Shama Ploni Balchovi, Eno in the Machamas Chova Kamar. We don't say he's giving it because of the Chov, but also Mishim Ribbis, and therefore it should be prohibited based on Ribbis. Ela Karaylo, She'asa Imi Nachas Ruach Kamar. He's saying, because this person, he uplifted my spirits. This is somebody who had, the individual in question, had a profoundly good, positive effect upon me, and that's why I want to show my appreciation. And this could give us a different insight into why it would be okay, according to Tosos, the case of the Zaken Echad, that the people, especially if it's a muflog, and the way Tosos presents it is that they just love this guy. They love this guy. This guy always took care of them. Maybe he took care of them in other ways as well, but he always took care of them. So because of the fact that he always took care of them, so that's why they want to give their feels to him. It's not as a repayment of the loan. It's not that they're giving extra because of the most shahayu b'telos etzli. It's because they want to show great appreciation for this guy. It's a funny thing because when the Chelkos Binyamin brings this case of the Zaken Echad, he says, so we assume that if the Shchimira said Karaylo, it must mean I want to give him, good. I want to give him a special gift because he was so good to me. And Mistama, he also he must have done other good things for him as well. I'm going to read from some others. Yeah. Oh, so the Ritva says. Take a look at the Bris Pinchas and Sif Chav Gimel. Okay? In Be'emtza Halva, so he talks about a couple of scenarios. One scenario is where you have in the middle of the halva, where the lender and the borrower will become friendly with each other. For reasons other than the halva, like they become relatives, or they become neighbors. So then the lova is allowed to give to the malvis the things that he would give to any neighbor or to any relative, even though he didn't give it to them before. And so this we understand. It's not related to the loan. It's related to the fact that they're neighbors or they're relatives. However, look at this. Then he says, or if they became friendly because they got to know each other by virtue of discussing the loan. I mean, he spells out that it could be that they would have become friendly even if the loan hadn't been extended, just because the borrower asked for the loan and then they schmoozed a little bit. Oh, why do you want the loan? What's going on with you, with your family? What do you need it for? And even if he wouldn't have extended the money, so maybe they would have developed the relationship anyway. So the fact that he extends the loan does not take away from the fact that now there is a genuine friendship that has been established. The dogma, like for example, if the borrower generally would allow only his close circle of friends to utilize his cell phone, obviously we're talking about a flip phone over here, so then it would be permissible to give that to the malveh as well, even though their relationship only came about due to the halva. Due to the halva, that's what he says. Okay, even though it's only because of now that he became acquainted with him, nonetheless that would be considered to be good enough. So this is something which is also stated by Moshe Zilberberg. Who says that it would also be permissible to give a matana muetis to somebody who you became friendly with only as a result of the halva. It's really a fascinating thing. It says, let's say they didn't know each other before the halva. This is an article in the Or Yisrael, as I mentioned. And they only became close with each other because of the halva. As the mistabed is nikva stama. He says that this would be considered to be like a gift that's not related to the loan. And a small matana would be permissible even prior. He's not talking about milcheres. Even prior to the loan being paid back. Unbelievable. But you find that this in a number of different writers, a number of different thinkers, that they say that this could be potentially permissible. I saw it in an article in the Yeshiva journal by Rav Yona Reiss, where he also talks about mishloach manos, giving mishloach manos during the term of a loan, where he makes at least the suggestion. He says that not necessarily everybody would agree, that even if they only became friendly with each other because of the loan, but nonetheless the mishloach manos is not being given based on the loan, but based on the friendship that they have with each other, that this should also be considered to be potentially permissible because of the fact that it's not that now they have a relationship with each other. It's I don't know exactly how far you're going to take this per se, but I found this to be a very revealing sort of idea, and it could explain, as I said, the Gemara Baba Basra on some level, and it could explain also the story regarding the person who is the Zakin Echad. But if so, then we can really understand very well the psak of both the Shulchan Aruch Harav and the Chokmas Adam, that if in fact when the lova is extending this bizman muflag at some later point in time, they really aren't escaping because of the loan, so maybe that would be problematic. But as I mentioned, otherwise, if there is no niskavin and it's not pirish, and the lender himself just sees this Rolls Royce roll into his driveway 20 years later, so maybe after 20 years, it's not, you could say, it's not because of the loan anymore. It's because whatever relationship we established at this point in time, obviously the borrower still has warm feelings towards me, and he doesn't have to do me a tova, at this point in time. It must be because, he feels that I was a good guy, and maybe that would be some type of a justification. I'm not sure according to the Ritva. But maybe according to the Ritva, you could say that if there were a couple of other things as well that they had in terms of interactions. So if he has the ability to attribute it to at least one other type of tova that maybe was done by the lender to the borrower outside of a loan context, so then certainly there would be room to be made mistama even according to that opinion. Go back to source Tesvav. So Shulchan Aruch Harav says that what is considered to be parhesia, and this is something which the Maharshal talks about. Maharshal talks about a case of somebody who's a borrower, and they buy an aliyah for an individual in the Beit Knesset. They buy an aliyah for an individual in the Beit Knesset. So is that considered to be parhesia? So Mistama, Ein Lechat of Darash Parhesia Gadol Mizeh. This is Barovam Hadras Melech. We're talking about a shul. This is before the day of Shtibels, I guess. That everybody's gathered together in the shul, and now the borrower is buying the aliyah for the lender, and it's during the course of the loan. So if he had done it beforehand, I would have said, well, maybe that should be permissible, but not. Because we say if it's a darash b'farhesia, it doesn't matter if he did it beforehand. It's still going to be problematic. So he quotes that. It says if it would be kigon lechavdo b'mitzvah beis hakneses, so that's going to be a problem. But there is a potential exception. This is an exception that the Maharshal writes that is accepted by pretty much all the poskim, which is that even if farhesia situation, if it's yadua lakol, if everybody knows that the borrower always did things b'farhesia on behalf of the lender before the loan was extended, so then even farhesia is going to be okay. In other words, that the case that Tosfos talks about, the farhesia living in the courtyard would be prohibited, is only when not everybody knows. Could be that some people know, could be a lot of people know, but not everybody. But if it's yadua lakol, that everybody knows, so then he says that is going to be perfectly okay. And then he takes it a step further. He says once we're going to say it's going to be perfectly okay, but for Hesia, even the other case of shalom midas is also going to be permissible if it is known that and here it doesn't have to be everybody knows because it's not for Hesia. It just has to be I know, the two parties know. In the shalom midas case, if before the loan was extended, the borrower would allow the lender to live in his courtyard, or forget the courtyard case, that's for Hesia, but to borrow his rake or his shovel or his lawnmower, even without asking for permission of the borrower, but it's something that the borrower would automatically do, even if it was shalom midas, even without his knowledge, he would always allow the lender to take advantage of his lawnmower and so forth. So then he says, by the extension of the same logic, we should also say that would also be permissible. In other words, that these are not absolute categories. It depends upon context. If I did have a situation, or let's say I had a situation where the whole world would take something from the borrower without permission, like a tissue box in the base medrash. Everybody takes from a person's tissue box without permission, right? I think so, because that's what tissue boxes are for. So presumably, since the whole world would take beforehand, so the lender doesn't have to treat himself any more stringently in that particular situation. Okay, fine. So the Nesiva Shalom. Once he notes, there's one other important thing that he picks up from the Shulchan Aruch Harav. Shulchan Aruch Harav, when he talks about the favors that are done prior to the repayment of the loan, so we said that those things are going to be permissible if I have, number one, it was done beforehand. Number two, it's not shalom midas unless it was always done beforehand shalom midas. Number three, it's not b'farhesia unless the whole world knows that b'farhesia was done beforehand as well, as we just said. But he adds the condition of the shach. The condition of the shach that the shach mentioned with respect to Ribbis Milcheres, so he mentions in this context as well. If you take a look at the bottom of page 4, of course, here too, he throws in this kabbalah consideration. So the Nesiva Shalom sums up basically what are the 4 conditions that would be necessary, and he says that we should be more machmir because the rules, as we know, of a bak ribbis are certainly more machmir during the term of the loan than after the loan has already been paid up. So here, the kabbalah issue should be taken more seriously because here the loan hasn't even been paid up yet. He said you really need 4 tanoim in order to allow the malveh to take a tova from the loan during the course of the loan. Number 1, tezu hanashi olava shehaya halova nosin lo afilu lo aveu. Number 2, lo yikak me'avlo shlomi daito, can't be shlomi daito. Number 3, lo yemi did the farhesia, unless this extreme exception applies. And number 4, b'chol zeh kasher olova nosin es tovas hanal malveh shelo l'shem ribbis. It has to also be shelo l'shem ribbis. Okay, fine. So we have all of these different conditions that are more of the conditions with respect to before the loan has been repaid. Now, Nesiva Shalom has a tremendous chiddush that you can feel free to disagree with. So when he's talking about basically this chumrah, so to speak, that b'shas piron, that he says b'shas piron, certainly all bets are off, even if it was rogil that the person generally gives matanos and so forth. But he says, it seems to me, getting back to the Machne Ephraim, he says, we don't reject the Machne Ephraim entirely. It's just that normally we have to be suspicious of whether something's being given as a gift. But let's say at the time of repayment, it's very clear that it's a gift. And this also may help us understand the sugya in Baba Basra, because Baba Basra, what's happening? The fellow is disposing of all of his assets, and the creditor is going to get two things. He's going to get this gift, a karoilo, and he's also going to get his loan. It sounds like he's getting them both at the same time, doesn't it? Right? So he says, if it's very clear that it's a matana, like, for example, the lovish shows up to the bar mitzvah of the malveh, because now they become good friends, as we mentioned, right? Oh, chasana, she'ose malveh, well, chasana, and he says, this is a great opportunity for me to repay my loan, and also to give a wedding gift, or a bar mitzvah gift, right? Or maybe, matana, the kahai gav nashari, says in the Sivir Shalom, I think that would be mutter. You wouldn't believe me if I didn't read this inside, okay? Maybe the Ritva says otherwise. But he says, kahai gav nashari, this is going to be mutter, even if he actually repays the chov at that point in time. But he has to know that he is not intending to give this as ribbis, but just as a matana. And as we said, it could be that under these circumstances, maybe because their relationship has developed, that he's even getting invited to the bar mitzvah, the wedding of the malveh, that he really intends it as a wedding gift and not something. But he says he has to be careful that he's not going to give a larger gift than what he would have given him if not for the halva. So I don't know, that's a little bit complicated, I suppose. So he says that, however, if it's akar piron, if it's after the payment has been made, so then he says that maybe even if it's a larger gift, it would be okay, as long as it's not in the category of matana meruba, if you're not going to be machmir like the shach, in the case of niskaven. So he has this incredible chiddush in such a case, but it's mistaber in terms of explaining at least that other sugya, that it might be an explanation as to why that would be okay, when it's clear that the additional amount that's being given is being given b'toras matana. Okay, now the question then arises nowadays. What's this business of farhesya? What's farhesya? Who knows that a lender loaned money to a borrower? It could be in the olden days. Everyone knew the affairs of what was going on inside of the community, and it was known, this is the lender, this is the borrower, and so forth. But in our communities, you don't know if the lender was a borrower, so you really have this issue. The borrower is going to buy an aliyah for the lender. Is it really going to be a problem? Is anybody even going to know about it altogether? He's going to live, he's going to go to his summer home in Orlando, or whatever, his winter home in Orlando, and the borrower is going to be sitting. Does anybody know the lender has extended him any money? So it says that the Sivir Shalom another chiddush. Let's take a look at the bottom of Yutes. This is in Simon Kuf Samach Sivches Sivkat Zayin. V'yesh la'ayin mekashel ba eno yidul l'rabim klal. Nobody knows. Fishu matzah b'yameinu, as is often the case nowadays. The mikra rabbim eno maktim edim. He does not have edim sign or anything. Elo nosin lo shavik savyado. He just gives him a private document. Ravaz gedolos. Maybe he puts something down in the mortgage land records, but nobody really takes a look at that. It's not advertised in the newspapers. You don't have a Mishpacha magazine, an Ami magazine. Doesn't say, oh, the following lender just extended a $1 million loan. Do you prohibit these cases as well? So he says, a chiddush. If the hava is only known to very few people, and whoever knows about the hava knows that they have a very close relationship, and they know that whatever favors the borrower is doing, he would have done in the past. So he says in such a case, this would be 100% permissible, because this is like, it's yadu l'kol, in the sense that it's yadu l'kol who need to know, because anybody who knows about the loan knows about the relationship. So that's what he says. But there are two other approaches. One is the bris pinchas. That's of Win. He says no. Pashtus mashmi and poskim shafilu mavo nasa betzina. Even if some betzina mikol malkum shel ribbis nitenes befarhesia. If the ribbis that's been given, this aliyah that's being acquired for somebody is being done in public, so then you have to be worried that eventually the people who are there in shul might find out about the hava. They might find out about the loan that took place. And once they find out about the loan that takes place, they'll realize, but this borrower who took this loan, he bought this aliyah for this person in shul, or allowed him to live in his winter home in Orlando. So then we have to be worried that it's going to become a problem afterwards. And Shlomo Levinger says that we're worried, in his article in the Yeshiva, he says, you don't know who knows about the loan. It could be that when the loan was being made, like maybe it was being made in a conference room somewhere, somebody was like, walking by the conference room, and that person, happens to daven in shul, they have a brother-in-law who's going to daven in the shul when the aliyah is purchased a couple of weeks or a couple of months later or whatever. She asked, you don't know who knows about the loan. So therefore he says you have to be worried that there are people who know about the loan. The Bris Pinchas says you have to be worried that people are going to find out about the loan. When they find out about the loan, they're going to put two and two together. So I think that particular chiddush of the Nesiva Shalom, I think is a stretch. It strikes me as a stretch. Now, what about if the person actually bought the aliyah? What does the Malva do? Somebody wrote an article about a borrower who bought the Chassan Torah. He bought the Chassan Torah. This is an article by Rav Shlomo Levinger, also from Yeshiva Tov. So he says, I guess that's what I quoted. So this is what happened. So the borrower bought an aliyah, and now what's going to happen if the person refuses to accept the aliyah? It might look like he's a pagam. Let's say he's a Kohen, so it might look like something wrong with his kuna, or his levia, or his Jewishness if he doesn't get up and and take the aliyah. So what does he do under those circumstances? So basically, everybody all say the same thing. Shevet Alevi, or Shmuel Vosno also has a tshuva about this in Chelik Tes. I think someone could find the Shevet Alevi. They all say that under those circumstances, the lender just has to make sure not to benefit monetarily from what the borrower is doing, and to pay whatever would be the value of the aliyah for himself. Rav Levinger talks about this. You have to pay the full amount. Let's say that the borrower spent $250 for Chassan Torah, but from the lender's perspective, he wouldn't have paid a nickel more than $50. So how much does he have to pay? So he thinks that he would only have to pay $50 in that situation. And it's not clear from the others who talk about this whether they agree that you could get away with paying that amount, or whether you would have to pay the full amount. I'm sorry, what?
Chassan Torah was an auction, and if that was the winning bid, then they could not have gotten away with a lower bid.
Yeah, but it could be that it doesn't matter. This person himself wouldn't have bid more money. And the Rav Levinger makes a very good argument. He says that for certain things that a lova would do to a malva, he's not allowed to do it, but it's not the malva's fault that the lova did it. Like Ribbis Dvar. The lova stops in the street and says, Shalom Aleichem, Shalom Aleichem, how are you doing? He wouldn't have said Shalom Aleichem beforehand. So does the lova have the right to then insist, okay, I said Shalom Aleichem, you got to pay me $2. It's worth $2. So let's say it's a $100 loan. So he says Shalom Aleichem 50 times, and he won't have to repay the loan. So he says it can't be that you have to pay money for this for a Ribbis Dvar situation. If it's something that doesn't have a monetary value to the lender, so then it doesn't make sense that you would make him pay for it. So he's stuck in a situation where, of course, he has to accept the aliyah, because otherwise it's not going to look good. Maybe it'll bring like a tremendous embarrassment. It's going to be a whole brouhaha. So he can take the aliyah, but he doesn't have to pay more than it's worth to him. Whatever's the difference between what it's worth to him and the amount that the borrower paid is basically Ribbis Dvar. So for him, it's not worth this amount. So therefore, he says that this is the total amount that he would have to pay under those circumstances, and that seems to be the Shevet Alevi's lashon is l'shalim lo kigemulo. Kigmulo, I'm not sure. Kigmulo sounds like maybe whatever the person paid. The Chelkas Binyamin says, he has this in his Biyurim, he says that these things to the lender should l'shalem ma shehaya shaveh zu, what this would have been worth of to this individual, ma shehaya nosein la'achar kedei sheyitin lo ke'oso kibud. What he would have paid somebody else in order to receive this kibud. So he says very much along the same lines. I think that's basically mistaber. I think it's mistaber. Even though the Bach had quoted Rav Yona said that when a person's maksik tov, this is the halakha that's quoted by the Rama at the end of Simon's Kosamach and Sim Chav Gimel. I think the person is maksik tov, so then you should be maksik tov in return. That's what the Rav Yona said. That the borrower says to the lender, "Oh Shalom Aleichem," so the lender just gives it right back to him. "Oh Shalom Aleichem to you." So now he doesn't owe him anything because he's basically paid him back in the same Shalom Aleichem. So he says that it sounds a little bit like the Bach saying you got to pay back. The way the Rama codifies the halakha is not at all like the Rav Yona. just says that being maksik tov is okay if it's the type of thing that the two parties would have always been maksik tov towards each other anyway. Like you have the situation, the double door situation. I have a lender and a borrower. They're walking through double doors, okay? So the borrower opens up the first door of the lender, and then the lender goes to the second door and opens it up for the borrower. So there is a classic example of the Rav Yona, gets prepaid right away, no problem whatsoever. But even if you didn't have that particular scenario, the way that the Ramah codifies this halacha is that, anything that they basically would do for each other anyway would be perfectly fine for them to do. But
so
what I'm sorry?
So you can buy an aliyah back.
I don't know. It's a possibility. Maybe it's a possibility. I don't know. So Levinger says that if you look at the Bach doesn't say that you always have to pay money. When he quotes the Rav Yona, he quotes the Rav Yona saying that Perish Mayri, the Bach says Perish Mayri, when he's explaining the Rav Yona, he says Perish Mayri Basias Tova. When he's doing a Siyas Tova, he's doing like a tangible deed. The borrower does a tangible deed for the lender, so then the lender should say, I'll do the same for you. Like he says, I'm going to talk to the president because I have a connection. That's something, he's a broker. That's like a broker. To make a connection, that's something that would be worth money. So he brings a raya from this, that even the Rav Yona is only talking about paying back something that's worth money to you. If it's not worth money to you, so then you don't have an obligation, you wouldn't have an obligation to do so. It's interesting that the Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva in which his father, it turned out that a person's father-in-law had borrowed 25 rubles from Moshe's father, and now Moshe discovers that this check was given over by the son of this individual to Moshe Feinstein for the amount of $100, and it was because the nifter, namely this person's father-in-law, had commanded him, had been mitzvah before he died, like a Shchimira case. He said to his son-in-law, I want you to give to Moshe Feinstein the $100 for this chov, for this debt of 25 rubles that I had borrowed from Moshe Feinstein's father in front of, many years ago. So Moshe Feinstein sort of ponders. He writes to this fellow, thank you very much for the check, but I'm not 100% sure what to do with it because, there's a potential Ribbis problem over here. Because it seems, according to what your father-in-law had said, that my father had loaned your father-in-law 25 rubles, and you're paying back $100, right? So this is a big, so he has a whole chad gadya over here, right? The Ozif Abba b'chav daled ruble, for 25 rubles. So he has this, sort of scenario. What in the world am I supposed to do? So he said, I think there are a few reasons I can be makel. Ultimately, Rav Moshe was not so comfortable being makel, but he said, I have a few svaras to be makel. Svara number one, to be makel, is that it could be that the chov was already, that if he really was a chov, he would have paid it back, many years ago. So if he didn't pay it back, then it must have been that it was really a matana that my father gave. And even if at the time my father said it was a hava, but probably is a good chance that that money was never paid, that it was probably forgiven, in which case it didn't have to be returned, in which case it's clearly a matana. So again, we're relying like the Machane Ephraim Svara, that if it's clearly a matana, so then there's room to be meko, particularly when we're talking about something where he says that there was either no loan to begin with, or there was a forgiveness of the loan. Number two, he says that it's perfectly possible that the value of 25 rubles is now at least $100, because the 25 ruble note was apparently no longer extant at the time in which this loan was repaid from Russia or whatever, and therefore he says that you would have to, I guess based on Din and Machusa, translate the 25 rubles into 25 rubles worth of gold. That's what he says. And this would certainly have to be paid in whatever was its value in gold. And whatever was its value in gold would certainly be worth $100. I don't know if that's maybe a Din and Machusa consideration. Number three, he says that the father-in-law of this individual was a Talmid Chacham, and of course he knows that Ribbis would be prohibited, and therefore he's giving it as a matana, and we have the halacha, Talmidei Chachamim are allowed to give matanas to each other. And certainly Moshe, whatever he would describe to call himself, this was, something that was supposed to be paid back to his father. So certainly, and Rav Moshe would also qualify, obviously. So we have here a repayment of Talmidei Chachamim towards each other. But he says there'll be a kshash ribbis because you can only pay up to 20% more, according to the way it's codified in Shochad. But you have the other svaras that maybe it's not worth more than the 25 rubles anyway, and also maybe it's not really a loan. But then he says that I still want you to examine in your head, because the father-in-law wasn't alive anymore, what exactly did your father-in-law say? Did he say that it was a chov, that it was really a chov? Because it really was a chov, exactly then why did he not pay the money back? And certainly he would not want to pay extra money that would be ribbis? Or is he saying that he borrowed the money a long time ago, right? But he's not saying that he still owes the money, and maybe the amount that he's giving right now is only bishvil yedidis uba'ava la'aba mori bishvil zeh, is because of a friendship and a love that he had for my father. Meaning, if you look at the Lashon, it sounds very much along the lines of what we're talking about. Oshama, like the Sugya and Baba Basra, like the Bris Pinchas, and the whole discussion. Oshama rak shelava lifnei shanim rabos, and the Zakin Echad. Aklo ama she'adayin achov chayev, v'nosein ata rak b'shul yedidus ubava. He's not saying that he owes the money anymore. The money was presumably paid up already, but now he just wants to pay this extra money because of the friendship that he has towards my father. But then he even adds the words bishvil zeh, and Rav Moshe seems to indicate that's legitimate, right? Look at the words. Okay, I challenge you. Whatever, you're welcome to interpret it in some other fashion, but that seems to be. It seems to be what Rav Moshe is saying. Okay, it seems to be. Okay, I'm just saying. Shezeh ein shayach l'ribbis. Because this is not considered to be a ribbis. That wouldn't be considered to be ribbis. So, I'm just throwing it in the mix. Okay, fine. So that's all I have to say about the question of the ribbis, of the matana, of the matana muetis during the course of the loan that's not related to the ribbis itself, the tremendous stringency of the shas piron, and the heterim regarding ribbis mucheres. Now, in terms of a dayan, you have to realize there's a very different dynamic at play. Because what are we worried about in the case of ribbis? I'm worried about ribbis. I'm only worried about ribbis. I don't have a problem with friendship. I'm happy for the lender and borrower to be friendly with each other. Chaverim kol Yisrael. This is what we want. This will bring Mashiach. It's wonderful. We love that, okay? We want everybody to be friendly. That's not a problem. What we want to avoid is only ribbis. That it shouldn't be a ribbis payment. That's why. So to be mego sometimes, if it's matana, as long as it's not harama, right? That's why. If they had a pre-existing friendship, so then we can be more mego. Even if they only became friends now as a result of circumstances of the loan, we see that there certainly are mekilim. With respect to that situation as well, and I would submit that there may even be a basis for that in the various sugyas. But ribbis is a different story. But shochad is a different story. Shochad is what? Shochad. It makes the dayan like one with the one who gives him the money. It's not because the money's being given to pervert justice. We know that because that's losasu mishpat. You're not allowed to losate mishpat. You're not allowed to pervert justice. The problem with shochad, as we all know, is even when the Baal Din gives the money to the dayan and says, I want you to judge the case correctly. I want you to judge the case fairly and correctly, even if I lose, no problem. But the dayan already is tilted. He's going to be slanted in favor of that individual. Says the Chazon Ish, and everyone will be talking, it's Xeris HaKosuf. Xeris HaKosuf. Whenever I have a court case, the dayan is automatically going to be slanted by virtue of the fact that he accepts money, even if he intends to conduct himself with integrity. If it will be an Isser V'Heter situation, I discover after Pesach that I inherited right before Pesach $5 million worth of beer, okay? And I didn't know to sell it, and now I have to make a decision. Do I rely on Rabbi Akiva Eger, that everything was included in the sales, that a Davar Shein Mesuyim? I don't know. And then I pass it for myself. I said, yes, I decided it's 100% mutter, even though I'm so nogay b'davar. The Chazon Ish says, no, this person is a dayan of integrity, even though it's an issa, even though he stands to gain a lot of money. It's not a court case. That would be perfectly permissible. But the Torah has Xeris HaKosuf, that the shochad is going to distort a person's justice. That's a totally different cheshbon. So here we have the story of the Bar Chama, right? Bar Chama killed somebody, it seems. Reish Galusa told Rabbi Yaakov, you decide the case. And then there were two Eidim that Bar Chama brought to Pasel. To Pasel one of the witnesses that he had committed the murder. And Rav Papi argued basically like he proved that the halacha is like Rabbi Meir, that if they were possible b'dinei mamonos, they're also possible b'dinei nefashos. And as a result, that Rav Papi was able to demonstrate that the halacha is like Rabbi Meir. So these Eidim were able to pass on one of the Eidim who testified against Bar Chama, and Bar Chama was not punished as a result. And Rav Papi got him off the hook. And once Rav Papi got him off the hook, Bar Chama was so happy and so ecstatic. That he kissed him on his feet, and Bar Chama said, and I'm going to pay all your taxes, okay? For all the years, I'm going to pay all your taxes. Okay, that's what it says. Rashi says, "La'atzilo kol yoma mimanos hamelch." That he was, that as a token of appreciation, he was going to pay all of his taxes that he owed to the king for the rest of his life. A very, very good deal. So the question is, but wait a second, what about Shochad? So the Rosh says, yeah, there would have been Shochad over here. There would have been Shochad over here. But he says that in this particular case, it's because of the fact that he says that this was something where he that a puppy wouldn't have had to pay the tax anyway. Chama was not doing him any favors, he was not doing him any favors. Shali Tivusa, Shakli Achigra, whatever. He was an Indian giver, a kind of a gesture. So because of the fact that a puppy wasn't really getting anything of substance because he didn't owe the taxes anyway, therefore it wouldn't be like Shochad Me'uchar. So we see otherwise that this would be Shochad. And of course this led to the famous comment of the Papula Charifta, right? The Papula Charifta, quoted by the Piskei Tshuva in Hilchos Dayanim, in Hilchos Shochad, says that even though a puppy himself was not the actual dayan, we see that anybody who's in this important position of authority, right, that he's nismanim al tzibor, even though that he would be that even those who are nismanim al tzibor, despite the fact that they're dineim or not din Torah, I think he wasn't talking about a puppy's specific position. He was assuming a puppy went together with the other dayan who was on the case, or Rabbi Abba Yaakov, but it wasn't like a real capital case. It was just like a knas case, So he said that we see from here that even people who are not like strictly real life dayanim, they're just community leaders, but they have to make a determination. Nonetheless, they would be subject to laws of Shochad. Now, that's one explanation. The Yad Ramah gives a different explanation. The Yad Ramah says that the reason why this was okay was not because Rapapi didn't get something of value, but he holds that since Rapapi himself was not an actual dayan, he was just somebody who was arguing in favor of Bar Chama. He was an onlooker who was offering his chachma. He was maybe a toin, right? He was a toin rabbani. Maybe not hired as such per se, but he just kind of like intervened based on maybe Vitzilu Eid. He figured I'm going to help out this Bar Chama. So since he wasn't a dayan, that's the reason it would be okay. But otherwise, it would not be okay. Some want to interpret the Yad Ramah as saying that, we see he was only concerned about Shad, so he holds that it really wouldn't be a problem with Shochad if it's Shochad Me'uchar. That's one interpretation of the Yad Ramah as well. But it doesn't really matter at the end of the day because the Ramah paskins like the Rosh. The Ramah paskins dayan shadon kfar, even though this was Bar Chama made his commitment after the case had already been decided. And the Baal Din then gives him a matana because of the fact that he helped him out, he ruled in his favor. Also lo l'kabel. Also lo l'kabel sounds like it's what? It's a deraisa or it's a d'rabbanan? It's a d'rabbanan. Sounds like an Issa d'rabbanan. Okay, fine. It's a deraisa. We wouldn't just say also lo l'kabel. We say harezu shochad. But also l'kabel sounds like an Issa d'rabbanan. But nonetheless, it's also, says the Gra, because it's like what? It's like Ribbis. So here we have our match made in heaven between Ribbis and Shochad, right? It says the same way that when it comes to Shochad, it relates, even if it's afterwards, unless it's muchok that it doesn't. So the same thing is true with respect to Shochad. And what's the proof text? The proof text says is the case of Bar Chama. And it's only because the Talmidei Chachamim would not have to pay mas anyways. It's like tshuva the Ber Asik. Ber Asik in the Chasimin Ayin Tes talks about a dayan who helped to resolve an aguna situation. And the aguna is so appreciative because he was able to figure out arguments as to why the husband's really dead and she can remarry, so she gave him money afterwards. And the question is, was he allowed to keep the money? It's very fascinating. He keeps asking he can keep the money. He can keep the money because he says you could argue it was just schar b'tola, and really she didn't need all of his machinations, and it wasn't like a real din Torah in which she was pitted against somebody else, and she didn't really need him because she could have just said on her own, Meis Bali, and we would have believed her. But I mean, what does that mean? Because she could have lied. So therefore, that's why he gets to keep the money. I didn't understand that argument. But there is such a tshuva in the Ber Asik. On the other hand, there's also a tshuva by in the Torah Lishma. Torah Lishma, which I think is a tshuva by Rav Yosef Chaim, right, the Ben Ish Chaim. So he says as follows. So he says that I had a chacham echad who wrote an argument on behalf of one of the Balei Din. gave it into the Dayanim. The Dayanim was so impressed by this argument that they ruled in favor of the side that he was arguing for. And now the question is whether he is allowed to receive money, because he's receiving his schar. Is he allowed to receive the schar tircha in such a case? Or is that considered to be shochad when he's paid afterwards? So do we say that he's not one of the dayanim? Or by virtue of the fact that they wouldn't have decided if not for his learned opinion, so therefore that would be considered to be like shochad me'uchar. And apparently in this case, it was mamish a Toin Rabbanim case. So I don't know what the Toin Rabbanim do actually with this tshuva of the Torah Lishma, because it seems in this case, they says what makes it particularly problematic is that it was stipulated beforehand by the party that he wrote this opinion for, that the party would pay him money in the event that he would end up winning the case. Because that there was actually a tanai that was made with the party that enlisted this individual to write an argument to submit to the dayanim in his favor, and he quotes from the sugya of, and maybe whether he would win or lose, but that doesn't really matter for these purposes. And he quotes from the sugya of Bar Chama in Sanhedrin, and he says that it's quite clear that Rav Papa was not a dayan in the matter. He was just somebody that was relied upon because of the fact that he was such a distinguished Talmudic scholar who was able to give opinions that the dayan in the case of Rabbi Abba would rely upon. And so he says, maybe Rayas of time. So too, since this person who wrote the Shuvah is bringing all kinds of arguments that the dayanim are relying upon, therefore he's considered like one of the dayanim, the shochad, and therefore he's not allowed to receive any payment because of shochad, even if it would be paid after the fact. And certainly when it was stipulated up front. So what do the Toanim Rabbanim do with this tshuva? I'm asking, what do they do with this tshuva? Doesn't it sound like, like a major pagam on every single situation of a Toanim Rabbani? Doesn't it? No, I'm just asking the question. Anybody have any way out of this? Yeah.
Maybe the Tonim don't think that the judge are going to necessarily base their psak based on when they're just presenting information.
But they're writing up shuvos. They're writing up shuvos for the Bati Din to rely upon. They're not doing like a lawyer in which they're just presenting the voice in front of a bezdin, a psak pichadilim. They're just presenting the facts of the case and giving sort of the litany of the circumstances and and everything that happened, so that the dayanim can properly apply the halacha to the facts of the case. But here, and making whatever claims that they're asking for, and whatever recovery they're seeking. But here, the Toanim, I know because I've sat on cases where people have submitted briefs from Toanim and so forth. They're arguing, they're submitting halakhic briefs that they to convince the Dayanim of the correctness of their position. So I don't know what to do about this. But I'm just throwing it out there. This is one clear application in terms of worrying about the schar in this in this particular case. It says of Moshe Feinstein, if it's stipulated that there's going to be a schar batala, so then a schar batala is would basically be okay. However, if a person is paying up money to a dayan because of the fact that the dayan ruled in his favor, so he says aslo the kaplo. So he says that is going to be problematic. And if it was stipulated up front, so that it's going to give it to the dayan, and it wouldn't be just that the parties agree that they're going to pay schar batala to the dayan. So then he says obviously that would be an issa deraisa, even if it's paid after the fact, and that doesn't count as an issa d'Rabbanan. As we said with respect to Ribbis, if it's stipulated up front, obviously that's also going to be an issa deraisa. I think that if you take does the money have to be returned by the dayan? So the Shulchan Aruch says, strictly speaking, the money doesn't have to be returned by the dayan if it's not requested. But the Aruch HaShulchan says, let's say Sidei Shemayim, of course it has to be returned. And the Aruch HaShulchan adds, you're not allowed to tilt the case because of love or hate of the parties. It's certainly based on L'kicha Shochad, a very serious matter. So the Piskei Tshuva brings the machlokas between the Dvar Shmuel and the Birkei Yosef as to whether if a person had given services to a dayan, he was a doctor, and he provided free services to the dayan before the case, so does that disqualify the dayan or not? So he says that if the person had charged for his services, so maybe it's a midas chasidus for the doctor to recuse himself from the case if he has a karas tov towards the doctor, but that certainly wouldn't passel him. But if it was provided for free, so then he says if it was only provided, the services were provided for free when the patient realized, when the doctor realized that he had a case in front of the dayan, so he said, oh, you know what, I'm going to give you free services, and lo and behold, 2 weeks later he has a case in front of the dayan, so that's a problem. But if he always had this relationship, so then that would be perfectly fine. That's what he says. However, because he says it's very similar, that if it was basically there's something that was done before the loan, and then it can be done even after the loan as well, and the same thing would be true for a dayana situation. But the Pirkei Yosef pick a love. He pick a love, and he says he's not really so sure that this would necessarily be the case. Because, we speak about a dayan, the Shochad paskins, based on the lashon of the Torah, a dayan who has to borrow kalim from this individual is pasul ladun, and he says that it could be that this is true, even with, it sounds like this is true, even with respect to a situation where the dayan was generally doing this beforehand, before the din Torah came to pass. Why is that? Because of the fact that the dayan is going to have a predisposition in favor of this individual. It's not a question of ribbis. Ribbis is a question of, are you doing it because of the loan? With the case of a dayan, it's a question of anything that's going to create a predisposition of the dayan to be slanted in favor of a party is going to be problematic, and therefore these types of relationships, even if they were 100% legitimate beforehand, it doesn't matter. It still creates the possibility of a tilting in favor of the individual. And yes, go ahead. Question.
I'm just, you alluded to this earlier with the Shochad, but let's say they bring the Rolls Royce, and Diane says, "Hey, thank you, I'll keep the Rolls Royce, but now I recuse myself. I'm keeping the Rolls Royce anyway." Is there any issue doing that? But they say, I only gave you tonight that you stay in the Bezdin.
No. You can't take it. If a person's giving it under this context, so we see from those stories in Suvas that it has to be the person both recuses himself from the case, and he's not allowed to take it, either. Right. But I think, but he says at the end, there's no raya from the case of Ribbis. And so I wanted to say, based really on the Chazon Ish, it's a totally different consideration with respect to the Ribbis scenarios. Now, sometimes there may be a small relationship because a dayan knows lots of people in the neighborhood and so forth, and it's not like there has been like a tremendous favor that was given to the dayan. They just, they know the person around town. They go to their shiurim and so forth. Maybe they've, maybe they've done nice things for each other. They've invited each other to their chasanas, to things of that variety. I don't think necessarily disqualifies the dayan, but it's at the very least a disclosure issue. I say that there are two different issues when it comes to a dayan. Some things are disqualification. Certainly, if it's a doctor who regularly performs services for free for the dayan, so that's much more problematic. If it is that they happen to be neighbors, in the neighborhood, and everybody brings mishloach manos to the rabbi, I don't think that if it's not like fancy schmancy mishloach manos, especially during the time of the din Torah that was brought before, I don't think that would necessarily be a disqualification. But it's at the very least a disclosure issue. And then if the other party is uncomfortable with it, the dayan would have to step down. It becomes sort of a general, issue with respect to dayanim in general. You have to really assess at one point in time that the relationship is too close. That's why very often what we'll say when we know the parties, and we'll say we know the person, they come to our shiurim and so they ask us shilas, but we're not socially close to them, because if you're socially close, then that creates it creates a different dynamic. But one thing that's certainly not a problem, is this is true both in the Ribbis context and it's true in the dayanis context, is if the dayan does favors for the individual. If it doesn't go in the other direction, then you have a dayan who's like he does chesed to people in the community. The fact that you've done chesed to the person doesn't disqualify you from the dayan, from being a dayan. The fact that a lender does chesed to a borrower is not something which is usher even during the course of the loan. It's only in the opposite direction, unless you're dealing with adam chashuv issues. But leaving that aside, so that generally will be okay. But nonetheless, even though when I have people in my home, so you could say I'm doing a chesed by having them in my home, but it also creates two other things when you have somebody in your home. When you have somebody in your home, number one, you're giving them access. And access is also very, very important in terms of a person could just like slip in something that could relate to a case that they have or that a close relative has, and you have to be very careful. You want to avoid that. And number two, as we saw even from the loan context, that too much of a close, if it's a very close relationship that a person comes regularly, even though you're doing them a chesed, but it also creates a friendship when you have like a very close schmoozing relationship and eating together relationship, so that also can become problematic in terms of it creating certain expectations expectations of doing favors and so forth. So that also is something that becomes much more problematic in the Yona's context than it does in the Ribbis context, where it could actually dispel the possibility that what's being given is based on Ribbis. But in the Yona's context, it can create a close kesher, which could also create this joining of the hearts, which is particularly problematic in the context of adjudicating a din Torah. Okay, so that's basically everything I wanted to say about this subject for today, and thank you all for listening. Okay, come see you.
Sheffer was once asked to be a dayan on some case for a community in London, and they sent him a beautiful portrait, picture, something, a painting, in advance of the din Torah.
Oh my goodness.
And he called him up and said, "Thank you so much, I'm puzzled now."
Yeah, right.
And they never asked for it back. So they as well.
That's it.